In 1956, in the city of Lisbon, a group of individuals came together and they were like, yes, let's create a football governing body for Africa. And boom, it happened actually. The Confederation of African Football was given birth to right there on that table in the city of Lisbon in Portugal. And 1 year later, 4 countries were picked to kickstart the African Nations Cup tournament. And the likes of Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, and South Africa were picked. But unfortunately, South Africa had to pull out due to apartheid reason. Back in the days, there was one or two conflicts in South Africa and affected their participation in that particular competition. And Egypt came out tops in that competition to win the very first African Cup of Nations title by defeating Ethiopia in the final. 2 years later, in 1959, Egypt hosted and they defeated Sudan by 2 goals to 1 to clinch back-to-back African Nations Cup title, the first team to ever do it since the inception of the world. In 1962, Ethiopia hosted the competition and the host city was Addis Ababa. It was supposed to have 9 teams, but one way or the other, 5 teams pulled out and it was left with Ethiopia, Egypt, Uganda, and Tunisia. Uganda making their debut for the very first time. And it was all about the host Ethiopia winning their very first African Nations Cup title after defeating Egypt in the finals. Ghana hosted in 1963, the very first West African team to do so, and they went straight to beat Sudan 3-0 in the final to clinch their very first African Nations Cup title. In 1965, this same country, Ghana, won Tunisia by 3 goals to 2 to clinch the second African Nations Cup title, Ghana winning back-to-back this time around. Ethiopia hosted again in 1968, trying to have their luck or trying to at least level up with the likes of Ghana and Egypt that have won it twice and back-to-back. But unfortunately, they failed, and it was Democratic Republic of Congo that defeated Ghana by 1 goal to 0 to clinch their very first African Nations Cup title. Now, there's something about Ghana always never relenting. They came back again in 1978 to try their luck, but this time around it was Sudan who was the first country to host the African Nations Cup that defeated Ghana by 1 goal to 0 to clinch their very first African Nations Cup title. In 1970, Sudan finally got their breakthrough. They defeated Ghana in the final to clinch their very first African Cup of Nations title, and it was all smiles for the Sudanese. In 1972, Cameroon hosted, but it was Congo Brazzaville that defeated Mali 3 goals to 2 to clinch their very first African Cup of Nations title. Congo Brazzaville is actually different from DR Congo. Okay, one Congo, two countries. Wisdom. Now in 1974, Egypt wanted to try their luck once again to maybe clinch their another African Nations Cup title by hosting again, but it was Democratic Republic of Congo that won that particular encounter. Again, Congo was known as Zaire as at that particular time, and they won for the second time the African Cup of Nations. This was the very first time there was a replay of a final. The first leg ended 2-2 between Egypt and Zaire. Then the second leg ended 2-0 in favor of Zaire, which made them to win that title the second time. In 1976, Morocco clinched their very first African Cup of Nations title. Hooray to Morocco! First African Nations Cup. In 1978, Ghana came back again to beat Uganda in the final, and they won the Nations Cup again in 1978. Despite having a very, torrid 1970s, the Nigeria national team in 1980 clinched their very first African Cup of Nations title by beating Algeria 3 goals to 0 in the final. It was hosted actually by Nigeria, and they went on and on in the national stadium in Surulere and beat Algeria by 3 goals to 0.
Wow, it's been an interesting roller coaster of a journey for the African Cup of Nations from day one in 1957. Well, up next is everything that happened after 1980 till date. Don't miss it for anything. Don't even miss it for a cup of tea. Don't even miss it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. See you next time.